Opinions and views expressed on this podcast are for informational purposes and do not constitute therapy, clinical advice, or psychiatric diagnosis, and should not be used as a basis for medical or health-related decisions.
There was a time when I believed in humanity, and that time is long gone. Many things have changed, and I was forced to believe only.
Hostiles inbound. We're under attack. We're losing ground. Air support inbound.
Welcome to Mind Maps, where we survey the psyche and navigate the mental terrain of modern actions and attitudes. I'm your host, Heiðrūn. I'm joined by my co-host, Ulf, and we are mapping minds over at Free Folk Works. To learn more about who we are and what we do, head on over to freefolk.org. To learn more about this podcast, visit freefolk.org/works. The left is left and the right is left, I always say. But why is that? That's the question we're going to attempt to answer on this episode of Mind Maps as we delve into the psychology of the political left and the political right. And what is the political left and the political right but an illusion of dichotomy? A political system that we have, particularly here in the West, that's proffered as two contrasting ideologies that afford a choice that really doesn't exist. It's a lie, isn't it, Ulf?
It is a lie. And as we'll see, I believe, the entire system is predicated on a false dichotomy logical fallacy in that it provides an illusion of choice, but it's also trying to constrain people into making one of two choices. For instance, we have more than one or two political choices in parties in the United States, but everyone pretty much just votes on those two Democrat or Republican parties, which is a false dichotomy because it's not dichotomous between those two, but people are convinced that it is.
Right,
and,
right.
And part of the reasoning, I believe, is they do that is because, again, as we're going to see, those outcomes of each party are the same. So they want to keep people voting between parties that are going to end up, giving them the same outcomes as they want, the people in charge.
Yeah, and it's really a cope, isn't it? Because those outcomes don't benefit the masses. They benefit the interests of an elite that exist outside and above the social hierarchy. This is something we touched on a little bit in our previous episode, the Alpha Dawn phenomenon, where we discussed and defined the male dominance hierarchy and how there's one outlier, the Sigma, right, that exists outside of that hierarchy. He can influence that hierarchy, but he himself is not influenced by it. And in the trifunctional system, this is a first function individual. So this elite would occupy the first function in this particular model, and it can influence that hierarchy, but it's not subject to that hierarchy. So the masses, the general population who comprise that hierarchy, they're not benefiting from these outcomes, are they?
They're not at all. And this comes back to an analogy that I believe is apropos in this position here, that the right like to use a lot, and that is of the sheepdogs and the sheep. So again, using the free folk trifunctional system, the sheepdog are going to be the second function. They're the ones that keep the sheep, which are going to be, in this analogy, the third function, in line.
Right, the enforcers. Yeah.
Yeah, right. They're the enforcers. They keep them corralled in the corral where they want to be, and this small elite cabal at this point would be the first function is actually the rancher, which nobody ever mentions in this analogy because they all, well, I want to be the sheepdog and you're the sheep, but they don't realize that the rancher controls both the sheepdog and the sheep to affect an outcome that is beneficial to the rancher, not to the sheep, and only marginally so to the sheepdog.
Right, right. And as we're going to get into a little bit later in this discussion, psychology plays a key role in that because that rancher exercises his control over both the sheepdog and the sheep, as you point out, using psychological methods. They have an absolute mastery of psychology. They understand human behavior in ways that the average person does not, and they're able to wield that to their benefit. Yeah. So let's talk about the expressions of the left and right, because it's really only the expressions that differ. You know, as we pointed out, this is an illusion of dichotomy. It's not real. It's a sleight of hand. It's magic for the masses to deceive them and distract them, and to some extent entertain them. But ultimately, as you point out, Ulf, to get them to do their will and to corral them where they want them to go. So let's begin with how the expressions of the left and right differ. Okay, I know you have some views on this. I have some views on this. So why don't you go ahead first?
Okay, so one of the big things that, in a way, they're the same is that both the left and right appeal to collectivism. However, they differ in how they basically sell this to their followers. The left is very open about it. Yes, you're part of the collective. It's good and right to be part of the collective, and straying from that at all is wrong. You're a bad person, and they vigorously enforce this with they establish these collective values from the leadership, and they constantly change standards of purity. So, okay, you're doing this, but are you doing enough? Are you supporting this enough? Are you actively supporting this, or just okay with it? And they keep changing that to keep their followers on their toes, to constantly be trying to fit in and be part of that collective and seen as, a good and right person. They'll redefine terms, and the followers have to keep up constantly on these redefinitions of terms. It's the Orwellian newspeak. They'll bring out a new dictionary almost every week that their followers have to keep up with. And, so the followers are constantly tripping over themselves trying to stay within this paradigm, whereas the right is a little more deceptive because it tells its people that, well, you're self-sufficient, you're independent, the good old American values. And by virtue of being independent and self-sufficient, now you have a duty to work collectively towards, all American goals, which are actually the goals of the elites within the right-hand political party. And they enforce the compliance of these party lines via appeals to patriotism, Christianity in the United States and most of the West, and to a lesser extent, an ill-defined American way. Right. Yes.
Well, I was going to say, I agree with that. I would define the right expression as open in the way that males are open in the display of their weapons, right? Males kind of have an outward orientation towards the world. Females have an inward orientation towards the world. The female expression is closed. She conceals her weapons. The male openly displays his weapons. And the propagandists, who've come up with the propaganda that they sell to the left and right respectively, it's absolutely genius because they know how to appeal to the respective mindedness here. The agenda of the right is fully convicted in its beliefs, like you say, of being self-sufficient and all of that. It believes it's being masculine, right? but it's actually not. It's being led down the garden path in that regard. The left, what they sell them, it's the ever-changing goalposts, right? It appeals to the plasticity of the feminine mind. It is plastic in its expression, much like a female. Constantly changing the goalpost, or constantly changing the, like you said, the redefinition of terms and things like that. So yeah, that's how the propagandists pit these two against one another. And then the other thing that I would mention is, the right always seems to assume a position of the mainstream, right? Its focus is on the conservation of the values of a particular culture, whatever that happens to be. And the left always positions itself as the counter to that. It's contrary for the sake of being contrary, right? Did you have some thoughts you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's very true. And I'm going to go back to your first point here a little bit.
Sure.
In that, yes, the right is open about it, so they're the ones who will wear the MAGA hats, or will be very open about, yes, we're trying to push Christian values, or we're trying to push, good old-fashioned American patriotism. What do you mean you don't want to salute the flag while it's coming down at the end of the day, or, you don't want to say the Pledge of Allegiance at a ball game or whatever. Stand for the national anthem, stuff like that. Whereas the left, yes, they're very, very closed, constantly changing. A good example of this is just a year ago, the left were virtue signaling over, well, we have to go to EVs because we're going to save the world. We're going to save the environment. It's your duty to the world to go out and buy a Tesla. And now that Elon Musk, who, by the way, is only a partial owner of Tesla, is on the other political side, well, now it's not your duty to the planet to buy a Tesla. In fact, we need to start burning Teslas down and destroying private property because we don't like this guy. So it shows that their values aren't really values. They just change according to the situation. And they're perfectly fine with that because they know they're being deceptive. They're okay with being deceptive. And you can simply go back to, Alinsky, his Rules for Radicals, where it outlines how to be deceptive, that being deceptive is part of how you win, etc. So they accept this, whereas the right want to have this illusion, and it's the voter base that needs to have this illusion that they're being straightforward, that they're telling the truth, and they are very much the true believers in this. They actually believe that this is what they're doing. This is what they're being led to do.
Right, they're convicted in that, as I said before, and it puts them at a disadvantage. I think. It's only for the sake of their strength, because of the more masculine virtues that you do see lived on the right as opposed to the left, that I think they're even able to come back from this, because the left is just so good at playing the right in this way. And they engage in what's called the slippery slope too. They'll say, well, we just want to be treated as equals, whatever the special interest group is, whether it's women, minorities, homosexuals, whatever. And then, now we want equal rights. Now you got to bake us this cake. Now you have to accept our pronouns. Now, and it just, they keep pushing the envelope. They keep shit testing the right. And in this way, they're able to encroach and they're able to gain power, sociopolitically.
Right. And this is where the right fails in being masculine, because it's part of the male job to set boundaries. Right. And they don't set the boundary at, that's fine. You can be homosexual if you want to get married and have all the downsides that go along with getting married. go ahead, but no, we don't have to bake the cake.
Right. Right.
You know, and they don't set these boundaries, and that's why it allows the slippery slope. It's, or if you want to use the camel in the tent, you let the camel keep taking additional steps until it's all the way in the tent. Now you can't get it out. Well, you don't establish boundaries. You need to smack it on the snout. No, you're not coming in. Stop. And they failed to do this.
Yeah, I know we're getting a little bit off on a tangent, but this is a worthy topic. I think the right does establish boundaries. The problem is they don't enforce them. I hear this a lot. They will draw a line in the sand and they will say there's the line, but they do nothing when the left crosses the line. They expect somebody else. In other words, they're looking, and this is where they're feminine, they're looking to outsource that cost. They're looking for somebody else to pick up the bill of enforcing that boundary. They don't realize, no, it's your responsibility to enforce that boundary.
Right. So you can ask the question is, if you establish a boundary and you don't enforce it, are you really setting a boundary?
No, on the contrary. I think you're doing the opposite. You're letting the other party know that they can encroach as far as they will because you're not going to do anything about it.
Right. So at that point, it just amounts to virtue signaling on the right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and it's my personal opinion that this shows the feminine psyche of those at the top of the political right, and because they don't want to be seen as the bad guy specifically so that they can maintain as much of their female voter base as possible.
Right. It's the psychology of the simp, right?
Right. So if they establish and enforce hard boundaries, that's going to start putting off the female voter base. Just look at the reaction of Donald Trump enforcing immigration law and our borders, and look at the backlash. Particularly, a lot of you'll see these TikTok videos and whatnot. A lot of these, in fact, I would say the majority are women reacting badly to this enforcement of a boundary, of a very legitimate boundary that pretty much every other nation but us has, or at least the West has. And now he's the bad guy. He's horrible. He's inhumane. Blah 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 blah. And this is what the people at the top of the right try to avoid by not enforcing boundaries. And unfortunately, like you said, it undermines their own position by doing that.
Right. And the badly behaved female, we'll just call her that, the badly behaved female and the simp, they are a partnership. They work in concert together and create a lot of damage as a consequence. But that's what you see at the top, as you say, of the political left and the political right, respectively. Right.
Right. And you see it's a dynamic you'll see in a lot of marriages. You'll have so we have the badly behaved female at the top of the political right.
Political left.
Or I'm going specifically to the badly behaved female on the right this time, because what they do is they will convince the voter base, the masculine voter base, of, hey, this is the way you really want to go, right? And then make them believe that they're making the agential decision to go in that direction, the same way a wife will manipulate her simp husband by making him think that he's in charge and making the decisions when she's really doing it.
Right. It's called stooping to conquer. Yeah. Yeah.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's talk a little bit now about how the expressions of the left and the right are the same. We were kind of going that way anyway, so we might as well just jump into it now. Both are reactive, correct? They're not proactive, they're reactive.
Correct. Yes. So as much as the left tries to say they're progressive and they're progressing society and they're moving to the future, they're not. They're reacting to what's happening. The right reacts to what is happening. They don't come up with new solutions. They just wait for something to happen and then try to either push it back towards nominal cultural values or push it further towards the countercultural value. So they don't have the initiative.
No, and they also complain. This is something that,
Oh, yes.
that I've taken note of, particularly on social media. It's off-putting and it's not constructive. We see a lot of folks, particularly men, who identify as being on the right, complaining like women and children, and not actually taking any action and not proffering any actionable solutions. So that's very disturbing as well. And something I want to remind our audience of, these prefixes, re and pro, they mean something. Okay. I did a presentation on, what was it? It was, well, it encompassed a lot of things, but the part of it that I'm referring to now was on sexual economics. And I talked about vigor and value. I've talked about these in other podcasts before. We're digressing a little bit, but it's relevant here because we're talking about reactive versus proactive. The feminine form of utility being value, and the masculine form of utility being vigor. Anytime you see the suffix pro, right, it's referring to something that moves something forward, right? So, the masculine role in a relationship is to be the provider, the protector, and the producer, right? So he's moving those things forward. Whenever you see the prefix re, this is a feminine behavior, right? The feminine retains, the feminine receives, the feminine returns, the feminine reacts. So it's applicable here. We don't see the left or the right being proactive, which would be a position of masculine agency. They're being reactive, which is a feminine behavior. I just wanted to point that out.
Correct. And we see this in the way both attempt to live in the past. Okay, so like the right always likes to harken back to late 1700s patriotism, just prior to and during our War of Independence, or the cowboy era, or the middle 1950s to early 1960s. Mm-hmm. And why is that? Well, that's when men of the nation were being proactive. We were separating from what we saw as a oppressive government. We were pushing forward into the frontier and conquering a new frontier. Or in the case of the 50s, we had just come back off of a world war, which cost the world a lot. And we had built the nation into this, economic and production juggernaut. And what were we doing? Well, we were going forth into the world and basically conquering economically and through manufacturing and putting ourselves on the top of the world, both in economic, political, and also in military power at the time. So these are all masculine expressions of pushing forward and going forth. And that's why the right keeps going back to that, is they're trying to convince their primarily male voter base that, yeah, you're still that guy, yet we're still doing that, when really they're not.
They're not.
Okay.
That's right.
Whereas the left keeps harkening back to, early 20th century conflicts between Marxism and capitalism. They try to act like every business, every corporation still has people literally chained to machines for 12 hours a day. Or they'll go to the counterculture of the 60s. I don't know about you, but for me, growing up in the 80s and the 90s, race relationships were pretty good. Nobody really cared what your race was. We got along pretty good. And then what happens? Well, you get a Marxist in, Obama, and he wants to throw us right back to the 1960s, thinking that we've got segregation again and all this other stuff.
The same thing with the women's movement. I mean, we've had more. I would say we have an inequality now that favors women. But women have more rights, more liberties, more privileges than they ever have before in the West, and yet the left will still beat that drum. Oh, women are being oppressed. Yeah, it's not true.
Correct. Right. So. And the point is in here, getting back to how they're the same, both sides are using these tactics to emotionally control their followers.
Mm-hmm.
They don't appeal to facts, logic, and reason of what's going on in the world today. They pull back to these emotional triggers to try to get their voters to vote in their way. And the left uses primarily feminine triggers, and they are pushing. One of the things they're pushing towards is a gynarchy. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're triggering the females. They're getting the female voter base, which is actually, again, kind of smart on their part, because, again, you've got the stooping to conquer wife dynamic in the household. Is they do end up influencing the votes of a lot of men through doing this, through influencing their women. Whereas, the right, one of their things that kind of cripples them is they appeal to majority religious ideals to push androarchy. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And just to digress a little bit, because we're using terms that generally aren't used in this method, the difference between matriarchy and gynarchy, and why what we're pushing forward to is not matriarchy. Matriarchy is where the woman acts as essentially the mother of whatever group, whether it's the family, the city, the nation, whatever. And gynarchy is pushing that women should vote or should be in charge simply by virtue of being women. Simply by virtue of being female. Same thing with androarchy.
Vagina power. Vagina power.
Right. But exactly, that evil vagina magic.
Right.
Androarchy and patriarchy have the same sort of relationship. And we do not live in a patriarchy, and we have not been living in a patriarchy for the last 1,000 or more years. Because in a patriarchy, the male is acting as the father of the family, the town, the nation. And instead, because of majority religious ideals in the West, it's been an androarchy where men were in charge simply by virtue of being male. Okay.
Right.
It's I forgot the name of that one YouTuber, but the penis power.
Right. Right. They're just throwing the proverbial D on the table.
Right? Correct.
Right. Yeah.
And both of these are they're just bad ideas, because you're pushing forth that someone should be in charge by a trait they were born with, not by any merit that they earned.
Right. And they're not investing. That's the important thing. A mother invests, a father invests in their family, and the mother or father of a nation invests in the nation. I would also add to your comments, your previous point there that you made, that those who are living in the past, again, whether it's left or right, doesn't matter, they are demonstrating that they're non-adaptive, right? And that's not that's not compatible with life. That's not compatible with the survival of a species. You have to adapt to the now. You have to adapt to the environmental conditions of the now. Otherwise, your species is not going to survive, let alone thrive. So they're demonstrating here, both left and right, that they're non-adaptive by clinging to the past and looking to the past.
Correct. And we can even cite that as one of what we see as natural law, because it is scientifically proven that it is not survival of the fittest. It's the survival of the ones best able to adapt.
To adapt, correct. And that is fitness. In other words, adaptability is fitness. That's what that means. Yeah, who can best
in that sequence? Yeah. So it's not the strongest who will survive. It's not the fastest. It's the ones able to adapt to the current environment, which is why mammals survived when dinosaurs didn't, because they were able to adapt to the new environment of the world. Right.
And to your second point, when you were talking about emotion versus logic, the two methods that the propagandists use to manipulate their respective followers. The emotional approach is what I would call manipulative. This is a feminine form of violence, actually. The logical approach, which I don't think the right really uses that. If you take a look at the propaganda, they are still playing on the emotions of the right. Right. You were talking about the patriotism and, hand on the heart and the flag and all of that, apple pie America, all that stuff. They are appealing to the emotions there. If they were truly going to, take a position of logic, which is actually a path to agency, logical argument, then they would be persuading with facts, logic, reason. That's not really what they do.
You're
that I
absolutely
see. Yeah, that I see anyway.
In fact, we can see that any attempt to argue with facts, logic, and reason, no matter how correct it is, fails.
Mm-hmm.
And I can simply point to the 1992 campaign of Ross Perot.
Yeah,
remember he
that's a good one.
Brought out all his little charts and he explained, all the math on why this works and why this doesn't work and all that. Absolute failure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And that's why good salespeople are always successful, because they know how to manipulate people's emotions.
Correct. And if you're a good salesman, I was actually a fairly good salesman. The first thing you do is you find out what that person wants, not what they need, what do they want. And then you trigger you guide your sales approach based on trying to convince them that they want to buy your product because it's what they want.
Right.
Which you come into trouble, though, when you find a disagreeable person that really is looking to buy something based on merit, and you try the emotional approach. It simply won't work.
It doesn't work. Sale. Right. That's the agential person, right? Having a disagreeable temperament definitely lends itself to being agential. It in of itself does not make one agential, but it sets up the conditions for somebody to more easily develop agency. We'll put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So,
and again, we can point to the great success of Donald Trump in his last campaign and his first campaign, actually, but particularly his last campaign, is he has the ability to appeal to everyone's emotions. And this really was a important thing in this election, because at least in the Gen X demographic, the majority of women voted for Donald Trump in the Gen X demographic. And in the other demographics, the women still gave more votes to his campaign than they gave to the Republicans in the preceding three campaigns.
I saw the numbers on that, and that was amazing. I mean, Gen X basically won the election. It was. Go ahead.
Right. Yes, we won this election, but yeah, it's important. I mean, he got increased minority votes compared to the last few Republican presidents and whatnot, because he's able to appeal to everyone's emotions. So It's not just, we're the patriotic guys, but hey, I want to make food cheaper. And people think he's, unprofessional, that he's maybe childish, but his little quips and everything while he's in debates works on the emotional level. He understands this is what he's doing.
Yeah, and he's identifying with the mind of the masses, what we would call the third function, that they make up the largest demographic of any population. By doing that, he's appealing to them subconsciously.
Correct. And, this brings us to the fact that the people at the top don't necessarily believe what they're telling their voter base and the masses. They have overarching strategies. They don't refuse.
Oh, no, they understand. Yeah, they understand their position. Absolutely.
So whether it's Donald Trump or who was a skillful Democrat politician, Obama, okay? They're just not going to tell their voter base, yes, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, because it's going to work. They don't even tell them. And it makes sense that, whenever, every time a party makes big moves, the rank and file of both sides have shown an inability to understand the motivations and strategies in play. So they're wasting their time explaining it to them. They just do it. And like you said, they're appealing on an unconscious level, which is very powerful.
Right.
So the people at the top of whatever party understand psychology, and they understand how it can be used as a tool to manipulate the people to do what they want. Now, for the agential people out there, understanding psychology can help immunize you from being manipulated like this, because you'll recognize what's happening to you.
Right. And this is how people can escape what I call the left-right trap, right? And maybe we can just briefly go over that before we close this out, because I think we've covered just about everything that we wanted to cover in this discussion. I mean, is there anything more you want to add on the expressions of the left and the right psychologically, how they're the same, how they're different?
No, I mean, we can talk for hours on the expressions. I think we've given enough examples.
Okay.
So let's move into how do we escape this trap?
Yeah. And I mean, a couple of points that I would make for my position anyway is one, think critically, right? This is something that's been undermined in at least Western society for many generations now through the public school system. But this is the first thing that you got to do, is be able to think critically. And that means applying logic and reason and subjecting all claims to proofs, right? Don't accept anything on its face, but prove it, find out what it is. The second way that people can escape the left-right trap is to find what I call the Aristotelian mean. This is a reference to Aristotelian psychology. Aristotle held that, or I should say posited, that the good lay in the mean between extremes. So in any dichotomy, you want to look for the mean and strive to attain it. And this conforms to natural law as well. This is in harmony with natural law. And then finally, as you pointed out just a moment ago, Ulf, learn to identify manipulation. And that way you can avoid becoming a victim of it. And that is just learning about psychology, and particularly the feminine forms of violence, which I know we're going to talk about probably on many an episode of Mind Maps. It's something that at least my work has become well known for, pathological feminine. Learn to identify those forms of manipulation so that you can avoid falling into that trap. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you make good points. Whenever somebody makes a claim, look it up. Find the receipts. Okay,
yes,
so
that's a good way to put it.
Something I've noticed, just following the politics on X, is one side or the other will make a big claim. Well, even if it's the claim that I want to believe, I'll still go and try to look up, did this really happen? And a lot of times it hasn't. Okay, so it's like, you can't just go and repeat the thing that you want to happen because it's what you wanted to happen. You need to look it up. And because realize whatever side you're on, whether you're left or right, the people at the top are manipulating you. Okay, they are not your friends. They're saying these things to manipulate you to go along with their agenda. It's up to you to look for the facts,
right?
And you need to make your decisions based on the facts and not the emotion. As far as the Aristotelian mean. Because what do we see? We see the proverbial pendulum swinging, and the further it swings to one side, typically it'll swing even further to the other side, because as a reaction to it swinging too far to one side, people are just going to react as hard as they can in the opposite direction, theoretically trying to bring it back towards the middle, but that never happens. It doesn't stop. It goes swinging too far. So what we want to try to do is maintain that mean to basically dampen the oscillation so it stays closer to the mean, which is more harmonious for everyone. Whenever you see periods of a civilization having long periods of peace where things are pretty stable, it's because that pendulum isn't swinging very far.
Right. And nature always seeks a balance. So like I said, this is in harmony with natural law. We are a part of nature. We come out of nature. it's natural to seek this balance. So seeking that Aristotelian mean just conforms to natural law.
Yes, nature will crush any extreme.
Right.
That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And learning to identify manipulation is probably one of the hardest things, because you've got to do your homework. You have to figure out, you're going to have to study specifically cluster B personalities, because they tend to gravitate to positions of power. So you need to recognize when you're dealing with one, what their tactics are. You can't fix them. At least modern psychology is at its current point recognizes you cannot fix a cluster B. So you just have to learn how to deal with it.
Right.
And there's books out there you can read on reading people's body language, on reading their tones of voice, how their eye movements are and stuff like this. And you can start learning, all right, are they manipulating? Do they know that they're manipulating? It takes a lot of homework. Okay.
Yeah.
And
you can listen to this podcast, because we're going to talk a lot about that.
Right. And,
Yeah.
as much as we study this, I mean, I wouldn't consider myself expert on it, just because there's so much to learn. It's a constant learning curve that you're going to be on to try to identify this manipulation and be the type of agential person that you maybe thought you were before, and they're starting to realize, yeah, I really didn't have that.
Right. Well, I mean, now we see how the political left and right are but mirrors of one another, and each reflects the same ideology. We also now understand that psychology, and specifically emotional manipulation, are employed by those at the top to control the behavior of those under their influence, and specifically what we call in the free folk the third function. This function, this demographic, is particularly vulnerable to propaganda and emotional manipulation. That's why these tactics are used to manipulate the largest demographic of any population. Moreover, identifying these facts makes it possible for us to chart a course of agency and thereby avoid falling prey to the snares of either the left or the right. You guys give us your thoughts in the comments below on today's episode. We want to know what you think about the psychology of the political left and the political right. That concludes this episode of Mind Maps. Thank you so much for joining us. Tune in next week when we will be building on today's discussion by mapping the psychology of the masculine and the feminine. Until then, we bid our agents in the field farewell. Hold to your purpose, and may the blessings of all free folk go with you. This is Two Wolf Crew, signing off.
Get to the extraction point.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Mind Maps. If you found the content of this episode of value, please be sure to give it a like and share it on your social media networks. To be notified of future episodes, subscribe to Mind Maps on your favorite platform. This helps the podcast to grow and reach more listeners. Your feedback is important to us. Please let us know your thoughts on today's episode in the comments below, or drop us a line at freefolk.org/contact. Until next time, navigators, fly free.
You're on your own. Good luck.